In the peaceful town of Willow Creek, nestled among rolling hills and picturesque landscapes, the Whitfields were a family admired by all. James Whitfield, a 52-year-old successful businessman, was the kind of man everyone looked up to. His name was synonymous with integrity and leadership, qualities that had made him a pillar of the community. He was a devoted husband to his wife Sarah and a loving father, known for his charismatic personality and unwavering dedication to both his family and his work. Sarah Whitfield, at 49, commanded respect and admiration in her own right. She owned a boutique that had become the talk of the town, not just for the fashionable clothes it offered, but for the warmth and charm she exuded. Her friendship with Emily Summers, her best friend of over 20 years, was something that everyone envied. Emily, a 50-year-old college professor, was Sarah's confidant, her sister in everything but blood. Emily's son, Liam, a 22-year-old recent college graduate, had always been like a second son to Sarah. The Summers and the Whitfields were more than just neighbors. They were family, their lives intertwined in ways that seemed unbreakable. But beneath this perfect facade, cracks were beginning to form. James's work had started to consume him, leading to long hours at the office and frequent business trips. His absence created a void that was felt by everyone, especially Sarah. She had once been content in her marriage, finding fulfillment in her boutique and her friendship with Emily. But as the years passed, the loneliness grew, gnawing at her in ways she struggled to understand. During this time of growing isolation, Sarah began to notice Liam in a new light. He had always been someone she had watched grow from a curious child into a handsome, confident young man. But now, with James absent more often than not, Liam's presence began to fill the emptiness in Sarah's life. What started as an innocent attraction grew, becoming something much more dangerous. The change began subtly, almost imperceptibly. It was at a summer gathering at the Summers' home when Sarah first felt the stirrings of something she couldn't quite name. The evening was warm, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers, and the sound of laughter echoed through the yard as friends and neighbors mingled. Liam was there, helping his mother with the guests, his easy smile and charming demeanor winning over everyone. Sarah watched him from across the yard, feeling a pang of something she hadn't felt in years. It was just a look, a glance that lasted a heartbeat too long, but it was enough to set something in motion. For the rest of the evening, Sarah found herself drawn to Liam in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. She sought him out in conversation, laughing at his jokes, listening intently as he spoke about his future. Liam, oblivious to Sarah's turmoil, responded with the same warmth he had always shown her. As the night wore on, the gathering began to wind down, and guests slowly trickled away. Sarah lingered, helping Emily clean up, but her thoughts were elsewhere. When Liam offered to walk her home, she accepted without hesitation. The walk was short, but every step felt like a journey into uncharted territory. They talked about the evening, about life, but there was an undercurrent to their conversation, an unspoken tension that neither acknowledged but both felt deeply. When they reached Sarah's house, there was a moment of hesitation. Liam turned to leave, but Sarah touched his arm, stopping him. For a brief, electrifying moment, they stood there, the night air heavy with the weight of what was unsaid. Then, as if by some unspoken agreement, they stepped apart, Liam offering a soft goodnight before disappearing into the darkness. But that night marked a turning point. The seed of something had been planted, and it wasn't long before it began to grow. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Liam found themselves seeking each other out more often. What started as innocent conversations stretched longer than they should have, shared moments holding more meaning than either was willing to admit. But as the days passed, those moments became more frequent, the connection between them deepening in ways neither had anticipated. Sarah knew what she was doing was wrong. She knew the risks, the betrayal it represented to Emily, to James. But the loneliness, the yearning for something more, something that made her feel alive again, was too strong to resist. And Liam, caught up in the thrill of it all, found himself unable to pull away, even as he knew it could only end in disaster. The days turned into weeks, and the innocent flirtations between Sarah and Liam grew into something far more serious. Their connection, once hidden behind polite smiles and casual conversation, was now impossible to ignore. It was during one of these seemingly innocent meetings that they finally crossed the line. It was a hot afternoon in late July when Sarah invited Liam over to help with some repairs around the house. James was away on yet another business trip, and the house felt emptier than ever. Liam arrived, eager to be of help, and Sarah welcomed him with a smile that held a hint of something more. They worked side by side, the closeness between them growing with each passing moment. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light through the windows, they found themselves in the living room, tools forgotten as they shared a quiet moment. The atmosphere was charged, thick with the unspoken feelings that had been building between them. Liam looked at Sarah, his gaze lingering a little too long, his thoughts a little too clear. And then, without a word, Sarah stepped closer. There was no hesitation this time, no lingering doubts or second thoughts. It was a kiss that began it all, soft, tentative at first, but quickly growing in intensity. For Sarah, it was like a dam breaking, a flood of emotions she had kept bottled up for far too long. Liam, equally caught up in the moment, responded with a fervor that matched her own. They pulled apart briefly, both knowing the gravity of what they had just done, yet neither willing to stop. The passion that had been simmering for weeks now boiled over, and they were helpless to resist it. What had started as a harmless attraction had now turned into a full-blown affair, one that they both knew could destroy everything. For the rest of the evening, they were inseparable, lost in each other. The guilt, the fear, the consequences, all of it faded away in the face of their overwhelming desire. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning, as they lay together in the quiet aftermath, that reality began to creep back in. Sarah was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "What have we done?" she asked, more to herself than to Liam. The weight of their actions was beginning to settle on her, the reality of what this would mean for her marriage, her friendship with Emily, and Liam's future. Liam, still caught in the lingering haze of their passion, could only shake his head. He didn't have an answer, and he didn't want to think about the implications. All he knew was that he couldn't pull away now, not after what had just happened. But as they dressed and prepared to part ways, the enormity of what they had done began to settle on them both. They knew that this wasn't just a one-time thing, a moment of weakness that they could brush off. This was the beginning of something much darker, something that would lead them down a path from which there was no return. In the days that followed, Sarah and Liam continued their affair in secret, meeting whenever they could find an opportunity. The thrill of the forbidden only added to the intensity of their relationship, but with each passing day, the danger grew. They were careful, at least as careful as two people caught in the throes of a passionate affair could be. Their meetings were discreet, often taking place in Sarah's home when James was away, or in secluded spots where they were unlikely to be seen. But despite their efforts, the risk of being discovered was always there, hanging over them like a dark cloud. Emily, blissfully unaware of the betrayal brewing right under her nose, continued to confide in Sarah, sharing her thoughts and worries as she always had. And Sarah, torn between her guilt and her desire, listened with a heavy heart. Every conversation with Emily was a reminder of the line she had crossed, of the friendship she was betraying for the sake of her affair with Liam. Meanwhile, James remained oblivious to the affair, his focus entirely on his work. The distance between him and Sarah grew wider with each passing day, but he was too wrapped up in his own world to notice. The cracks in their marriage, once subtle and easy to ignore, were now gaping chasms, but James was blind to them. As the summer wore on, the pressure began to mount. Sarah and Liam's affair was no longer a secret in their hearts. It was something they both knew could not continue indefinitely. The secrecy, the lies, the constant fear of being caught. It was all taking its toll. Yet, despite everything, they couldn't bring themselves to end it. The connection between them was too strong, the pull too irresistible. But the longer they continued, the more dangerous the situation became. Close calls and near discoveries heightened their anxiety, but also their resolve. They knew they were playing with fire, but neither could walk away. The affair was a ticking time bomb, and they both knew it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down around them. They were too far gone to stop now, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was just around the corner. And they were right. By late August, the heat of the summer had become oppressive, mirroring the tension that had settled over Sarah and Liam's lives. The affair, once thrilling and intoxicating, was now a source of constant anxiety. They were no longer just sneaking around. They were actively trying to avoid disaster, but the strain was beginning to show. Sarah could feel it in every interaction with Emily, the guilt gnawing at her like a persistent ache. Emily's kindness, her trust, had become unbearable to Sarah. Every time Emily spoke of Liam with pride or James with admiration, it felt like a knife twisting in her gut. The lies were suffocating her, but the thought of ending things with Liam was equally unbearable. Liam, too, was feeling the pressure. The excitement he had once felt in being with Sarah was now tinged with fear and regret. He was growing increasingly uneasy, haunted by the reality of what they were doing. He couldn't stop thinking about what would happen if they were caught, how it would destroy his mother, ruin his own life, and shatter the Whitfield family. It all came to a head on a particularly sweltering afternoon. James was supposed to be out of town for a critical business meeting, and Sarah had invited Liam over, as they had done many times before. But this time, the air was thick with tension. There was no laughter, no lightness in their interactions. The weight of what they were doing had finally caught up with them. As they sat together in the living room, the silence between them was heavy. Sarah could feel the end coming, the inevitable conclusion to their affair looming over them like a storm cloud. She looked at Liam, searching for something. Comfort, reassurance, anything to stave off the dread that had settled in her chest. But Liam was distant, lost in his own thoughts. He had been avoiding Sarah's gaze all afternoon, and when he finally did look at her, his expression was one of torment. "We can't keep doing this, Sarah," he finally said, his voice low and strained. "It's going to destroy everything." Sarah knew he was right, but the thought of losing him was too painful to bear. She reached out, taking his hand, trying to hold on to what they had, even as it slipped through her fingers. "I know," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion, "but I don't know how to stop." They sat there for a long moment, the gravity of their situation pressing down on them. The affair had reached a breaking point, and they both knew that they couldn't continue like this. But the decision to end it was one neither of them wanted to make. And then, in the midst of their turmoil, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway shattered the silence. Sarah's heart stopped. She knew that sound all too well. It was James, coming home hours earlier than expected. Panic surged through her, and she looked at Liam with wide, terrified eyes. There was no time to think, no time to plan. They were out of options. Liam scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice edged with fear. Sarah's mind raced, but there was no answer. They were trapped, caught in the worst possible moment, with no way out. The affair that had once been their escape, their secret passion, had now become a nightmare. The sound of the front door opening echoed through the house, and Sarah knew there was no turning back. The truth was about to come crashing down on them, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. James entered the house, his mood sour from a frustrating day at work. He was expecting a quiet evening, a chance to unwind before heading back to the office later that night. But as he stepped into the living room, what he saw made his blood run cold. Liam was standing there, pale and visibly shaken, while Sarah was frozen in place, her face a mask of terror. The tension in the room was palpable, and James knew immediately that something was very, very wrong. "What's going on here?" James demanded, his voice sharp and accusatory. He looked from Sarah to Liam, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene before him. There was something in their expressions, something that made his heart pound with a mixture of suspicion and fear. Sarah tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She could see the realization dawning in James's eyes, the pieces falling into place as he took in the sight of Liam standing in their home, looking guilty as sin. "What the hell are you doing here, Liam?" James's voice was low, dangerous, and filled with an anger that made the hair on the back of Sarah's neck stand up. Liam didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was racing, but all he could think about was how horribly wrong everything had gone. He had never wanted this, never intended to hurt anyone, but now he was standing on the edge of a precipice, with no way to stop the fall. James took a step forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "Answer me, damn it! What are you doing in my house?" And then, before anyone could react, the tension snapped. James lunged at Liam, his anger boiling over into a violent outburst. He grabbed Liam by the collar, yanking him forward with a force that sent them both crashing into the coffee table. Sarah screamed, rushing forward to try and pull James off Liam, but it was too late. The fight had already begun. The living room erupted into chaos as James and Liam grappled with each other, the sound of breaking glass and upended furniture filling the air. In the midst of the struggle, Liam's hand found a heavy glass lamp on the side table. Desperation took over, and without thinking, he swung it wildly. The lamp connected with James's head with a sickening thud, and suddenly, everything stopped. James staggered backward, his eyes wide with shock and pain. For a moment he stood there, swaying on his feet, before collapsing to the floor in a lifeless heap. The room fell into a stunned silence. Sarah stood frozen, her mind unable to process what had just happened. Liam, his breath coming in ragged gasps, stared down at James's motionless body, the reality of what he had done crashing down on him like a wave. The blood pooled around James's head, staining the carpet a deep red. It was a sight that neither Sarah nor Liam would ever forget, a moment that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Sarah fell to her knees beside James, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch him. But there was no response, no sign of life. James was gone, and with him, any chance of saving what remained of their lives. Liam dropped the lamp, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He looked at Sarah, his voice barely a whisper. "What have we done?" Sarah couldn't answer. All she could do was stare at the man she had once loved, now lying dead at her feet, and realize that everything had changed in an instant. Their lives were over, ruined by a moment of passion and a split-second decision that could never be undone. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in for Sarah and Liam as they stood over James's lifeless body. The shock was quickly replaced by panic, their minds racing as they tried to grasp the full extent of their actions. They knew that they had crossed a line from which there was no return, and the consequences were too horrifying to contemplate. It was Sarah who spoke first, her voice shaking but filled with a desperate resolve. "We have to hide the body," she said, her eyes wide with fear. "We can't let anyone find out about this. We'll both go to prison." Liam, still reeling from the enormity of what he had done, nodded numbly. The idea of going to prison, of his entire life being destroyed, was too much to bear. "But how?" he asked, his voice hoarse and trembling. "What do we do?" Sarah looked around the room, her mind scrambling for a plan. Everything was happening so fast, but she knew they had to act quickly. "We'll clean up the blood, get rid of anything that could tie us to this. Then we'll move his body. We have to make it look like he just disappeared." The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. They wrapped James's body in a sheet, struggling under its weight as they went down the stairs. Every step was filled with dread, the reality of what they were doing pressing down on them like a heavy weight. Sarah's mind raced with the fear of being discovered, while Liam was consumed by a growing sense of guilt and horror. Once they had managed to get the body outside, they heaved it into the bed of Liam's truck. The effort left them both panting, their nerves frayed to the breaking point. But there was no time to stop, no time to think about what they had done. They had to keep moving, had to finish what they had started. Sarah drove James's car to a nearby parking lot, leaving it there in an attempt to create the illusion that he had gone out on his own. She parked the car and wiped down the steering wheel and door handles, trying to eliminate any trace of her presence. Then she hurried back to the house, her heart pounding in her chest. Meanwhile, Liam was back at the Whitfield home, beginning the grim task of cleaning up the blood. Every swipe of the cloth felt like a betrayal, the scent of bleach mingling with the overwhelming guilt that gnawed at him. The master bedroom, once a place of comfort and intimacy, now felt like a crime scene, a place of unimaginable horror. When Sarah returned, they worked together in silence, scrubbing away the blood and disposing of anything that could link them to the crime. The tension between them was palpable, the weight of what they had done pressing down on them like a suffocating blanket. After hours of painstaking effort, the room was clean, but the sense of dread remained. They had managed to erase the physical evidence, but the emotional scars were permanent. Every corner of the house seemed to hold a memory of what had happened, a constant reminder of the life they had destroyed. For 2 days, Sarah and Liam avoided each other, the weight of their secret pressing down on them. Sarah went through the motions at her boutique, but every interaction felt hollow, every smile forced. At home, she avoided the bedroom, unable to face the emptiness that now filled the space where James had once been. Liam, meanwhile, returned to his life, but he was a shadow of his former self. The guilt and fear were unbearable, and he found himself unable to focus on anything. He cut off communication with Sarah, unable to face her or the reality of what they had done. They had agreed not to speak until the situation calmed down, but the silence between them was deafening. The tension in Willow Creek grew as the days passed without any sign of James. The community began to notice his absence, whispers spreading like wildfire. The perfect facade that Sarah had worked so hard to maintain was starting to crumble, and she knew it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. And then the police arrived at her door. It started with a knock, sharp and insistent, that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. She opened the door to find two police officers standing on her porch, their expressions serious. Her heart raced as they introduced themselves, explaining that they were investigating the disappearance of James Whitfield. The moment she had been dreading had arrived. Sarah struggled to maintain her composure as she answered their questions, her mind racing with fear. She repeated the story she had rehearsed, explaining that James had gone on a business trip and hadn't been in contact since. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she forced herself to stay calm. The officers listened carefully, their eyes never leaving Sarah's face. They asked for access to James's phone records and emails, which Sarah reluctantly agreed to. She knew it was only a matter of time before the investigation uncovered the truth, but she clung to the hope that they might be able to avoid suspicion for just a little longer. As the police left, Sarah closed the door and leaned against it, her legs trembling. The pressure was mounting, and she knew that the fragile web of lies she had spun was starting to unravel. Meanwhile, the police began to dig deeper into the case. They spoke to neighbors who mentioned seeing Liam's truck at the Whitfield house on the day James disappeared. The officers' suspicions grew, and they decided to interview Liam. Liam was at his wits' end when the police approached him at his home. The fear that had been gnawing at him for days now threatened to consume him. He repeated the lie that he and Sarah had agreed upon, saying he had been helping with yard work on the day James went missing. But his voice shook, and the officers noticed the fear in his eyes. Detective Laura Mitchell, a seasoned investigator with a sharp mind, took a special interest in the case. Something about Sarah's story didn't add up, and she was determined to get to the bottom of it. She began to scrutinize every detail, looking for inconsistencies, and it wasn't long before she found them. Sarah's timeline was full of holes, and her nervousness was palpable. Mitchell's keen eyes missed nothing, and she quickly realized that there was more to the story than Sarah was letting on. She decided to dig deeper, focusing her attention on the relationship between Sarah and Liam. It wasn't long before she uncovered the truth. An anonymous tip, a neighbor who had noticed the strange interactions between Sarah and Liam, led Mitchell to investigate their relationship more closely. What she found shocked her: secret emails and text messages that revealed the depth of their affair and their desperate attempts to keep it hidden. Confronted with the evidence, Sarah's calm demeanor began to crack. When asked to explain the communications with Liam, she tried to downplay their relationship as mere friendship, but Mitchell was relentless. The detective pointed out that friends don't exchange such messages and mentioned the blood traces found in the house. The walls were closing in, and Sarah knew it. She was trapped, caught in a web of her own making, with no way out. The investigation was closing in on the truth, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. With the evidence mounting, Detective Mitchell pressed harder, zeroing in on Liam. The young man, already on edge, could no longer bear the weight of his guilt. During a tense interrogation, with his lawyer at his side, Liam broke down. He confessed to the affair and to the tragic events that led to James's death, though he insisted it was a terrible accident. The confession was the final piece Mitchell needed. Armed with the details, she quickly obtained a search warrant for Liam's truck. There, forensic experts found fibers matching the sheets from the Whitfield house and traces of James's blood. It was irrefutable evidence that linked Liam to the crime, sealing his fate. James's body, hastily concealed in a nearby parking lot, was soon discovered. The town of Willow Creek was left reeling from the revelation. The once perfect couple's life had been a facade, hiding dark secrets that had now come to light. The community's shock turned to sorrow as the full extent of the tragedy became clear. Sarah and Liam were both arrested, their faces etched with the realization that their lives were over. In the courtroom, the affair and the murder were laid bare for all to see. The emotional testimonies, the evidence, and the confessions painted a picture of betrayal and loss that shocked everyone present. The jury deliberated briefly before returning with a verdict. Liam was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Sarah, guilty of being an accessory to murder, received a 15-year sentence. The once thriving Whitfield and Summers families were left shattered, their lives forever altered by a moment of passion and a single, tragic mistake. In the aftermath, Willow Creek struggled to return to normalcy, but the shadow of the crime loomed large. The Callahan house, once a symbol of success and happiness, stood empty, a silent witness to the devastation that had unfolded within its walls. The town would never forget the tragic events that had destroyed two families and left a permanent scar on the community.